same set of rules. And then once a year is kind of our typical, the agencies will do a site visit and then check up on what's going on in that site. If there are complaints about problems, then the first line is the recycled water purveyor, who would go out and respond to those complaints and work with the site supervisor to correct that problem. In our area, and it's not necessarily the same everywhere, we also have county health that's involved, and county health can come out and issue citations against the recycled water purveyor as well as the use site. So we think it's, if you look at it on the whole, it makes sense as a program. So you don't necessarily have to have the water supplier out there every month checking on it. We have limited resources, right, and it's best to focus the resources in an efficient manner. So that's my comments.
Right. No, thank you very much. I think it may well be also that we just need to ask staff to follow up with the region on why it appears that the Roanoke Park issue hasn't been responded to, and see what they have to say about it. So it may be more of a site-specific problem we have rather than the structure of what we've proposed in terms of enforcement. I mean, folks are limited in their staffing at all levels, but there may be an issue, a persistent issue that's leading to a sense of discomfort with the issue when in fact enforcement could handle it. So thank you for that. That's helpful. Ricky Russell with the California Coastkeeper Alliance.
Good morning.
Good morning. Nice to see you.
So first I'd like to start off by thanking board and staff members for meeting with us and really working hard on this order. I know that a lot of hours have been burnt, and we really appreciate the effort and collaboration. And second, I want to sincerely voice our support for the increased use of recycled water as California's part of California's water supply portfolio, and state that we share the board's belief that recycled water is essential for sustainable water management in California. That said, California Coastkeeper Alliance does have some serious concerns remaining with the state board's recycled water general order, which we feel creates a lack of oversight and the potential for unintended consequences, leading to the degradation of beneficial uses, including impacts to California's critical groundwater supplies. A foremost example of this is the order's classification of recycled water as return flow, not subject to NPDES permits when entering waters of the United States. Exempting recycled water discharges from NPDES process, we feel is characteristic with the overall concerns of our overall concerns with the general order, as they are unnecessary steps taken to create regulatory loopholes and establish what we feel are risky precedents that will threaten water quality. Again, that said, we understand the urgency of the drought necessitates quick action, and not every concern can be given full and close consideration. For this reason, we request the incorporation of a sunset provision in the general order, so it is made clear that when the drought ends, the order's effects will no longer be in place. More specifically, speaking to some of our concerns with the general order, we feel there is a significant lack of public oversight in the general order that will prevent stakeholders from identifying and raising concerns, most specifically with agronomic rates, but we feel throughout California there needs to be a greater opportunity for public input. So in that regard, we ask that the draft order include a public petition process regarding the executive officer's determination of whether site specific considerations exist. In addition, we request petitions for a public hearing shall be granted when NOIs within a region with sensitive beneficial uses exist, and furthermore, we request petitions for public hearings when existing studies find the potential for groundwater contamination exists due to evapotranspiration derived irrigation rates. Further speaking to our concerns, we believe that existing WDRs should not be preempted by this order, as the purpose of the general order is to streamline the use of recycled water permits. We feel that's an unnecessary provision and contradicts with stated streamlining goals. To address this issue, we request that that the draft order explicitly state that WDRs will not be preempted, and at a minimum that the burden of proof to be on a permittee to prove why existing WDRs should no longer be in effect, rather than that the executive officer is charged with proving that WDRs should stay in effect. Additional concern regards salt and nutrients. We believe that we appreciate the concern that the inclusion that the draft order requires project applicants to be consistent with applicable salt and nutrient management plans, but feel there's a potential for inconsistency in areas where salt and nutrient programs have not yet been developed or completed for individual basins or subbasins. And speaking of that, we request that it be made clear that for projects proposed in a basin where the salt and nutrient management plan is being prepared, the administrator must show through salt and nutrient mass balance or similar analysis that the project is consistent with a standard of 10% of the available assimilative capacity as estimated by the project proponent in a basin or subbasin. And furthermore, that monitoring guidelines be clarified within the general order to establish a clear framework to demonstrate that salt and nutrient requirements are being consistently met. Furthermore, another concern is the authorization of degradation without sufficient monitoring. The general order interprets the anti-degradation policy to allow some degradation to occur due to the use of recycled water, but we feel the current monitoring standards don't allow for a proper assessment of what that degradation will be, and we'd like to see some clarification on that. A final point would be we do believe that frost protection should be explicitly prohibited in the order. This would be consistent with prohibitions already established in Region 1 and the fact that frost control is not irrigation, and that would establish some consistencies with the order. So thank you again for staff and board's hard work, and those are all my points kind of in a mouthful there. So curious if you have any questions.
Thank you. I have some questions for staff, but
Yeah, well, it seems like, or some of the comments you made, we've responded to. I realize this is a very fast-track process, but for instance, your concern about keeping under existing orders, we have a finding 29 that speaks to that issue. So I understand not catching all of the changes that we've done, but it seems like some of the comments you made have been addressed. And staff can fill us in on that too.
By all means, and my apologies if I...
No, that's okay. This has been an extraordinary process to do this order on staff and stakeholder from both perspectives, and I really appreciate it. So yeah, that one's on page 13 of the change sheet order, finding 29.
Excellent, thank you.
And then I just noticed that your request for concerning about prohibition of discharge of surface water, that's in A3 of prohibitions. So it clearly prohibits the discharge to surface water.
Therefore, no NPDES permit, WDR. No, WDR can't allow discharge to surface waters unless it's also an NPDES permit.
Excellent, thank you for the clarification.
yeah, this was my question for staff, but I'll defer. It's just, there are a number of concerns, and when there's a concern that someone raises or that we have, there are a number of ways to deal with it. One way to deal with it is to try and put a bunch of requirements up front to sort of reiterate certain things. The other is akin to the suggestion that Board Member Diadamo made in terms of having you all report back on the impact of this general permit, both in terms of people opting into use to see whether it served its purpose of efficiency, both during a drought and in general, since we will be in a long-term drought, I think, even if we don't have a proclamation, and the use of recycled water is something that we have encouraged in a variety of ways. And the other is what's been the enforcement, what are the concerns, where do we seem to be? And so a number of the concerns that have been raised, we could tick off in a report back in terms of you all letting us know how it's going in a year or two. And then see if we need to do more or not, as opposed to prophylactically putting a lot of bells and whistles on it, which is how bureaucracies and long regulatory mother may I's grow, is trying to anticipate everything early. And in some ways on this, where we do have quite a bit of experience and we are looking at some of the issues in other fora that would then apply to this, another option would be just to come up with some form of report back to us on what you're finding, which then is done in a public forum where people can come and you all can report on advances on a number of these fronts, both in terms of how it's used and what the issues are, et cetera, and then we can decide whether we need to revise the order.
Sure, that's a great idea.
That might be a way to deal with it. All right. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time with us in this. We'll think about those. There are a lot of specific suggestions. All right, Brian Cullen, Perk Water.
Good morning, almost. Good afternoon, I guess. I'm Brian Cullen from Perk Water. We're a water reuse company, and I'd actually like to say thank you very much for everything that you're doing to push forward the initiative of recycled water in the state. I think it's very impressive what your board and staff has been doing, and the governor has been pushing forward over the past year. And also want to acknowledge the Division of Financial Assistance and staff there for the work that they've been doing in terms of trying to put SRF money with the recent adoption of the recycled water loans and providing financial incentives for recycled water projects. So just want to applaud you for that. So in terms of our comments to the general permit, understanding and respecting that there's groundwater recharge regulations pending and so on, we also think that there's a tremendous opportunity for groundwater recharge in the state, and our comments were based upon that and the benefits of groundwater recharge, and pointing to projects such as the Orange County Water Districts project, and one of the projects that we're involved with in Ventura County for the city of Santa Paula, which is a groundwater recharge recycling project also. But the benefits that are well known, but I'd like to repeat them regardless, is the indirectly establishes a new supply of water by replenishing groundwater supplies. And it's a cost-effective and dependable method of storing recycled water for reuse. And the marginal cost of treatment for groundwater replenishment is more competitive to ratepayers than other alternative water supply projects, for example, ocean desalination. As much as we support ocean desalination, we think that the recycled water and groundwater replenishment is very cost effective and less than 50% of the cost of the ratepayers to actually produce the recycled water. We think it creates more local water independence for discharges, thereby reducing the need to continually import higher volumes of potable water supplies, for example, the San Diego County area. Eliminates discharges to the ocean and saline bays. Reduces seawater intrusion, for example, the Orange County Water Districts project, thereby further protecting groundwater supplies. Eliminates, defers, or redirects the cost of upgrading many aging ocean outfalls. Safely replenishes groundwater supplies through the use of readily available advanced treatment technologies, resulting in a proven method to store and reuse water and indirectly freeing up potable water supplies for a higher and better use. And we'd actually suggested an amendment to the former Section 10, which is now Section 11, to allow groundwater replenishment as an authorised use under this general permit, but respecting and understanding the groundwater recharge regulations are pending.
It would be a weird thing to do when they're pending and due the end of this month
Understood, and we respect that.
by a sister agency at the moment, that we're hoping to be one big happy family.
But generally speaking, I mean, we're hoping to see this to be, it's a promotion of recycled water, and we very much and wholeheartedly support it. And citing the Heal the Oceans California Ocean Wastewater Discharge Report and Inventory dated March 2010, there's a daily discharge of 1.35 billion gallons of treated wastewater to the ocean from over 40 wastewater treatment plants. This represents 1.5 million acre-feet per year of lost water resources which could be readily treated to an advanced level and returned to the state's groundwater basins for storage and reuse. So with the current general order, and once again, I think it's fantastic the work that you're doing. I just hope and welcome local government embracing the general order and feeling the same sense of urgency that we're all feeling throughout the state, and embracing recycled water projects as a safe way of producing a new supply of water. We think that local recycling is a big part of the answer, and a decentralized method of recycling, treat it locally, recycle it locally, and it's a very cost-effective method of doing that. And please continue to simplify and streamline the process, and we look forward to further progress towards this initiative. And thank you very much.
Thank you. And next is Catherine Rubin from LADWP.
And as Catherine is coming up, let me make a comment. Brian was too modest to mention it, but I had the opportunity to tour the Santa Paula wastewater treatment facility, which PERC was a critical component of. And I strongly recommend, if any of you have not toured that facility, it's an amazing recycling facility. And I shouldn't admit this publicly, but the part that amazed me the most is that the manager was able to operate the entire plant using his iPad.
It's a new world, that's what I was saying. A lot of farmers farm by iPad now, which is incredible. All of DWP, one iPad.
Hello, I'm Catherine Rubin from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Thanks for having us today. And we want to commend the staff for everything that they've done and on the fast track that they've been on. As you know, LADWP, that recycled water is a critical element of our whole water picture and our water supply, and we're trying to increase our goal to use 59,000 acre-feet by 2035. So this is really quite important to us. You know, due to the climate change and the current drought situation, the use of recycled water has become even more important to us to provide a sustainable water supply for the future. We believe also that this is probably a good time to re-educate people that recycled water is a resource. It's not a waste. And we've been trying to do a lot of that outreach, a lot of that type of education, but we think that it would be very helpful if the state board and the regional boards and you guys got out there too and did some of this education, because coming from you would hold a lot of weight. Coming from the water purveyors, they know that we want to increase our use, but coming from you would be very helpful as well. So we want to move away from references from the code that recycled water is a waste and start looking at it as a valuable resource. We, like I said, we really appreciate what staff has done. You've addressed most of our comments. We just had one issue, and that was with waiting for the engineering report to be approved before we could use the recycled water. So you know this WDR is for non-potable uses, and as was mentioned in the presentation by your staff earlier, it's for uses that are safe for in the human health and the environment, and it's already been approved by the CDPH. And so we would, as we mentioned in our comments, we would send in a notification. We thought to really streamline the process, we would send in a notification to the CDPH and to the regional board of the use, and that the engineering report would follow with how, you know, we would apply the recycled water, so that without having to seek the approval from CDPH, so that we could expand the use more efficiently.
So are you saying, and maybe I misheard you, that the engineering report would follow, or that it could, you could enroll after you put in the engineering report but before it was approved?
Well, we would submit the engineering report with our NOI, but that it would be a part of the notification process, and we wouldn't have to wait for the approval. I know that CDPH has, they don't have the resources to turn it around real quickly. So we're just trying to streamline that process, because these uses that we're talking about are uses that have already been approved in the Title 22. So we were hoping that the process could be even more streamlined, because in the WDR, as you have it right now, we have to wait, or we have to submit an approved engineering report. For our existing WDR that we already have right now, and we would move over to this WDR for the non-potable uses, we do have an approved engineering report, and we would submit that with the NOI. But for those uses that have not yet, or we haven't started, we don't have an approved engineering report for, but they still fall under the Title 22, and they're safe for the environment and the health, we would like to just do notification with an engineering report being submitted, but not having to wait for the approval to come back.
I don't think that would be proper. I have to
That was going
disagree.
to turn to you for
Yeah, sorry.
response there. Go ahead.
I think I need to jump in here. I think it's very important to have an approved Title 22 engineering report. Usually those are done way ahead of time. So I'm not sure what LADWP is referring to, because if you add one more irrigation site, that doesn't necessarily need a new Title 22 engineering report. But that would be notified in the NOI, and we would review that. So I don't see it as that taking a long time.
Well, we have an example. We wanted to use recycled water for street sweeping. And we had turned in the engineering report to the CDPH for their approval. And we waited, we waited. It took a while for that approval to come through. We're not saying that we wouldn't submit the report. We would be submitting the report. There would just be a more streamlined approach to the approval.
Yeah, the question would just be, otherwise what you would have is you would start, and then they would have to yank you back, which might not be the best situation either, because just the submission of the report alone without someone to review it doesn't make sense. I get the timing thing you're saying, but it could lead to a peculiar situation where perhaps somebody's engineering report wasn't so good, right?
That's right.
But I'm curious though, Catherine, what specific recommendations do you have with respect to streamlining the process?
Well, the specific recommendation would be that during the NOI process, we'd still submit the report, but that the CDPH then would just send us back an approval letter saying, we received the report, we know that it's listed in Title 22 as an approved use, and that they would allow us to go ahead.
But they wouldn't do
as
that
they
without
would-
reviewing it first.
That's correct. Yeah. So we would.
So
we
where's
would
the
review-
streamlining? I'm not sure I understand.
That's right.
Oh,
Well,
so
I
they
guess
would
for the
still have to
streamline, 'cause
approve it
it's
anyway.
already
Okay,
approved
I
in Title
misunderstood.
22. It's already listed.
Yes, but they would have to review the report in order to make that finding.
Right.
But
I guess
help us
part
here.
of the, if I may, part of the comment that also maybe you can help clarify, because this was actually a comment too in your letter as well, is you mentioning existing recycled water projects with approved Title 22 engineering reports. So we were reading that to imply that they already have a site-specific order from the regional board. And if they do have a site-specific WDR, then there's no requirement for them
To
to go under this one. If they choose they want to be covered by this general order, then they would be taking the steps that are necessary to be able to get this order, and in between, they'd be able to continue to operate on their existing order. So that part of the comment was confusing to me.
But you're talking about an additional use, not something you already have a WDR for.
Right.
Right. And under so you're doing an NOI for a different use. You've already asked on street sweeping. Did you get street sweeping eventually?
We did get it all.
So what would be an example, a new area or a new?
A new non-potable use for another area.
Okay.
Yeah, that's not, but it's approved in the list of Title 22. So it's already listed in Title 22,
Mm-hmm.
but we just don't have the approval via a report from CDPH.
Is it assuming that type of use was covered in the engineering report that you had submitted to CDPH, or you mentioned discussing providing an updated report to reflect that new use?
It could be both. Yeah.
Right.
And that's exactly what any new use we would want to review. So and whether that was done expeditiously or not, that is something that we need to review. A new use like street sweeping or cooling tower or some industrial process, that's, I believe that's clearly in the statutes.
Because the point of your review is the plumbing issue in large part, right? Oh, and whether the engineering supports the Title 22 use.
Well, with street sweeping, you got procedures that you need
Right.
to follow to, handle it properly. So those have been approved at other localities. So there shouldn't have been a long lead time to approve that in LA.
Well, maybe at the break you can talk together and find out why it took a long time.
I was going to suggest that the board directed staff to report back with respect to how these orders are implemented and possibly some of the impediments
Right.
in expediting it. So the best approach at this point would be for us to work with CDPH. Both CDPH and us are committed to help expedite this or request for new recycling use.
Okay.
We can coordinate to make sure that these approvals are done in a expedited manner, and if we have any issues that is kind of creating a problem, then report back or make adjustments as needed. But this is such a specific case that I'm kind of puzzled how we can kind of cover it in this general order without maybe creating a loophole.
Right. Exactly.
And that would be helpful, Felicia. Maybe in the general order that CDPH, whatever, gets back to us in a time date certain, like within 14 days of submittal of the NOI or something like that.
It's always hard to do that.
Yeah.
I have to say, it is hard to do that. Or what? That sort of thing. You can do it as a
Right.
intent, but I see the point you're talking about. It's hard to figure out how to do it.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, we'll think about that too over lunch. Carrie Fisher, Farm Bureau Federation. And just so you know, we'll take a little more public comment. We have a couple of other speakers after this. Then we'll have a bit of a discussion to give some direction to staff over the lunch break, and then we'll take a lunch break both for us to think about it and for you to work on things. I'm not committing that everything we suggest to you before lunch is everything we're going to suggest, because I want to be able to go over the notes and read some things before closing, and I suspect my colleagues do as well. So,
Good afternoon,
Fisher,
Carrie
thank
Fisher
you.
with California Farm Bureau Federation. We'd like to thank staff for many of the revisions that came out in the change order. It did respond to many of the comments that we made in our comment letter. We specifically wanted to just point out the references to the irrigated lands, existing WDRs, for example, in Prohibition A3. We appreciate those references. And also the inclusion of livestock watering, as that's an option for recycled water. With regard to concerns, we do have a few that I just wanted to reiterate right now. One goes back to an earlier discussion that some earlier commenters had with Board Member Diadamo with regard to the use area monitoring and conflicting monitoring and reporting requirements, especially with existing irrigated lands programs. And we just have some concerns on how that's going to play out with duplicative monitoring, and then also just how the applicants are supposed to work with water quality coalitions. So we did appreciate some of the discussion earlier about putting in some language that references the existing monitoring programs, and those can be used in lieu of the monitoring in the general order, so long as they obviously are monitoring for the constituents of concern that are in the recycled water general order. And then we did have some concern with Prohibition A2, which is prohibiting application to saturated soils, and just how that would play if there is a need for the application of recycled water for frost protection, so long as the runoff does not leave the application area. Thank you.
I have a question.
Yes.
So are you, did you see the requested change that Dave Smith went over, the two-pager?
I did not, no. It wasn't passed out.
Okay. It'd be good to see what you think of the recommendation on use site monitoring.
Okay,
Maybe over the lunch break, you could take a
Sure.
look at it. Thanks.
So
definitely.
I also have a quick question because in an earlier discussion, I thought I heard Tess Dunham saying that there really is not equivalent monitoring of this type going on the irrigated lands program. There's really a
She was
totally
talking about the frequency of the monitoring is not necessarily the same, and that you can have the constituents of monitoring can be the same of what you need to actually monitor, but how it's done was different. And so there's some confusion on how the two programs would work.
So I'm just trying to make sure I understand, because we'll work through this during the lunch, is that the constituents are being required of the producer and not at
Right.
the farm level.
Right.
And so there's going to be an overlap there.
Right.
But there is this observational monitoring and application rate issue. And my understanding, and I'm trying to make sure I got it right, is that those are not required under the irrigated lands program. So there wouldn't be this overlap of monitoring. These are a different piece of requirement. Yes, they would be an additional requirement. I understand that. Am I understanding that correct?
It depends on the region, on what they're wanting to do, and so that's why it's also confusing. We have different members in different regions of the state would have different things to do. And so we're just a little concerned right now on how that will play out. And so we are concerned that there'll be overlap, duplicative regulations, or just a very confusing requirements for our members who then might choose not to use recycled water because they are confused on how this plays out with their water quality coalition, and if they're having to do double the work in essence, as opposed to the next door neighbor who's not using recycled water.
So on that point, and I'll be disclosing later that I did have an ex parte 2 discussions with Tess Dunham on these issues, and it is a little confusing. So I had also talked with staff and asked Darren Polhemus, and I see he's here, because it is kind of confusing to figure out, you know, exactly, is this duplicative? Is there something additional that needs to be done? And I know that there's somewhat language referencing irrigated lands, but reading through that attachment B, that's getting back to where we started the conversation, and that is, it does just seem a little confusing. So maybe it'd be good over lunch. I know Darren is familiar with what they're doing in the various regions as far as requirements. Not that it covers the whole state, so that's, you know, a separate issue.
Right. So you want to figure out what to do. You want to have some review to make sure things aren't duplicative or that people can weigh it. So you have to figure out what the procedural way to do that would be.
You know, as you directed us, we'll discuss this with OCC as well as Jonathan during lunch. But since the NOAs are issued by the regional boards, one approach may be to make a statements that when regional boards issue these NOAs, have the requirements of the existing orders in mind to avoid any
something like
conflict.
that, just to
Something
give
like
them the
that,
leeway
yeah.
to.
And then in
do that.
response to Board Member Didi, the concerns with respect to duplications were raised in 3 specific areas, and we addressed those. And this language, the new format, is new, so it's appropriate that, you know, we are grateful that folks have looked at it over the weekend, and we'll be working on some adjustments to that to address their concern and the point that you have raised. But that would be one option, to have a specific statement with respect to how regional boards handle this when they issue the NOA.
We'll look forward to that. Thank you. Dave Boland, Association of California Water Agencies? Oh, I'm sorry, I had a separate card too, sorry. Yeah, I remember that. It was a while ago, but it's sort of, I'm sorry if some people I know want me to cut it short, but I do think it's an important issue and we didn't have that many cards. And so I want us to be able to really hear everybody so that we can think it through. So Debbie, did you waive your time as well? Or you have additional things? I know Tess said that you would have other things to say.
I know, and I thought between Tess and I, I was going to be she was going to be the short one, but I think it might go the other way around.
Okay.
So good afternoon, Debbie Webster, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Clean Water Association. And I want to first start by giving my appreciation to your staff for really taking the time to understand some of the issues that we face, especially in the Central Valley, because as you know, we're a little bit different. We have agriculture actually happening in our backyards and very close to our treatment plants, and we have a lot of small communities. So to be able to really understand the issues and try to have them work with it, just did a great job, and so thank you for that.
That's great to hear.
The second thing I just want to highlight, this was in water reuses, it was in Civiqua's letter, but we would really like to see this order be as water recycling requirements. It really gives the right message that water recycling is not a waste versus it's a waste discharge. And that makes a difference. That nuance makes a difference to many of our agencies, and that's important. So we'd like to see that change. We understand that there might have been issues regarding authority, and so if that gets cleared through, if this permit can transfer to a water recycling requirement, I think you're going to see a higher acceptance rate. So the second to last part, or the third thing that I have, is on page B2, there is a section about field testing. And first I want to say I appreciate this section, because for many of our small communities, and now for other users that might fall under that are not wastewater treatment plant operators, this to be able to do some streamline and effective but inexpensive monitoring, field monitoring measurement is really good. But I do want to hit on a couple things that hit on the resource realignment effort that we've been doing too, and that is to streamline this even a little bit more and not to duplicate efforts. If this work is done by a ELAP or environmental laboratory accreditation, environmental laboratory accreditation program, which DPH now certifies, this is all covered. These parts are all covered, and so in order to require the administrator to report on this and to do this, it's duplicating work. And so if it's covered there, the monitoring, the quality assurance, the training, everything is put there. So we're asking in this section to, up at the very top, provided that the samples are collected, this is the edit, would be at the end of the field test, may be used provided that the samples are collected by a California laboratory, sorry, now I can't even read my writing.
You have to tell us
accreditation program or ELAP, or, and then go through your 1 through 4. So you'd recognize that you wouldn't have to do these otherwise. The second part.
What page is that?
We're at B2.
Yeah.
B2, very top. The second part is on we've had actually on this.
Oh, ELAP as a substitute. for all
ELAP, yeah,
four
the
of those.
ELAP.
Okay.
Yeah, that's, I
Okay.
figured it
But-
hasn't been spelled out yet, so probably needed to be spelled out. The second part is on number 3. Usually these instruments, they're usually fairly inexpensive. They don't go through this process of servicing as much. They just get a new one. If the calibration's not working, it gets a new one. And there was a concern that by putting the calibration in 2 places, there might be some confusion as to, well, field calibrated is okay, that part. So we actually recommend that be removed from this. Alternatively, if that's not acceptable, at least remove the and or calibrated, because the servicing would take care of calibrating, and then add by the manufacturer or authorized representative. So not only that, but someone that is authorized to do that. And then finally on the fourth part of that, the field calibration reports, I don't really know if you and the regions as regional boards really want those reports for them to be maintained and available for inspection. Seems like a lot more reasonable way of handling that information. And so instead of being submitted, which is, you don't get them submitted as part of your MPDS or your WDRs, to actually just have them available, we think is a better alternative. And then one other small clarification is on page B6, which is part of the annual report. My assumption, and I'm hoping that that's correct, was that the tabular and graphical summaries of all data were really all the monitoring data, whether it's the chemical, physical monitoring or the visual inspections, that's really what that meant. So if we inserted the word monitoring, that would be great. And now I know I'm a little bit over, but I do want to add one last thing. There was some discussion about, how this permit should work and whether it should, whether we should have an expire or relook, and the relook is not a problem. The expiration is a big problem for our communities and for the people that want to use recycled water. There needs to be a certain amount of certainty that the water is going to be there and the investment that's made in order to provide recycled water is there. And so I really urge you not to kind of go the other direction on that. We really want to see recycled water expand. We think it's a great resource and really, for the benefit of California. So be happy to answer any questions. All right.
Thank you.
No,
So I have a quick question for staff to consider over lunch. Is when I look
Okay.
at the Debbie's comments about field measurements and activities, I do not see any requirement for those kind of monitoring that would require this. So they were not requiring pH, dissolved oxygen, electric conductivity.
My sense was it must have been lifted from somewhere.
And so if we don't have any requirements, there are requirements on the POTW for their treatment
Right.
compliance, but there aren't any requirements for any of these activities in this order. We might be able to just remove all that, and if that's possible, we should look at doing that. It would relieve confusion and concern, I think.
I had a question. I didn't get the second point that Debbie made because it's not also in their submitted comment. Could you clarify what you were suggesting?
She was responding to Coastkeeper comment that suggested
No,
a
the
sunset.
last one. But
Oh, the other one.
in
Okay.
between of request for inserting the word monitoring somewhere.
Sure, hang on just a second.
Oh, sorry, right.
I'm right here. It is in the monitoring report section, so I think it's on
B6.
B6.
Okay.
And if you look at sorry, I'm still trying to get there. I think at number 4, yes, at number 4, it would be tabular and graphical summaries of all monitoring would be the word that would be inserted.
How monitoring data collected?
Yeah, monitoring data collected during the year.
As opposed to all data that you collected on everything at all times?
Well, it just provides some clarity.
You're worried
so.
about. All right.
We can do that. Thank you.
Did you, I'm going to, just so John, also recognize that those things, other than turbidity, which if you have to do turbidity, you will be doing it at the treatment plant and it'll be covered in there, is not there. However, there are some places where the administrator may ask the user to do something or vice versa. And so I didn't necessarily think that section was harmful. In fact, could be really helpful, could clarify it, but you are right in that sense, is there's nothing required by this order that requires that type of monitoring.
All right. Before we break for lunch, I'd love to give my colleagues an opportunity if there's any thoughts, questions, or directions you have for staff before we come back.
Well, I thought that, the comments presented by Dave Smith, there were some things for us to consider. I don't really want to go blow by blow, but I thought it was constructive input. I can reiterate that I think we can default to an annual monitoring frequency. I think monthly is overkill from my experience.
On everything?
On observations and that sort of thing, and the regional boards have the discretion to go a greater frequency. And the reason why is because of the 18 years experience with 9611 in the San Francisco Bay region. We have it set up as annual, at least annual monitoring default, and it's been operationally workable. Everyone enrolled. So we talked about one of the metrics of success for this permit will be how many people enroll in it. Well, that permit was successful in 1996. So I want to put, my opinion, I'm open to discussion on that. But as a default, at least annual, and I don't think we're precluding more frequent observational monitoring by making that floor type requirement. It sends a signal that, we don't need to babysit recycled water so closely as if it were secondary treated wastewater doesn't meet Title 22. So I'm trying to find that balance of treating it as a water resource as opposed to a waste. And I think the frequency of monitoring sends a signal. That's just my professional opinion. Thanks.
I always hate to disagree with a fellow engineer.
Well, and you may have another professional opinion.
Well, I would concur that I would like for us to revisit the monthly part. I am not comfortable with annually. I would suggest quarterly as a compromise. And then my only other comment has to do with something Ms. Webster said. And by the way, thank you, Debbie. Those were all excellent comments that you provided. Her first suggestion with respect to ELAP, I should be more familiar with ELAP, but I'm not at the moment. So if you could look into whether or not going through an ELAP accredited laboratory would address those concerns, then perhaps the suggestion that she made would also be a very meaningful one to make in the permit.
The primary issue that was raised here today for me is if the irrigated lands program has problems with this permit in the sense of it's not clear and it doesn't seem to quite work, that's a problem because that's really how we got into this. Mm-hmm. we wanted to make sure that recycled water could be used in the Central Valley and other places safely. And so let's look at the wording. I think that was one of the requests from both Tess and SWRCB and that we look at the wording to make sure that it's as clear as possible. And my guess is that, I really appreciate having the drinking water program represented here by Brian and as we move forward, there are many areas in recycled water that we are engaged in that hopefully the drinking water will be us, and so I think that if I agree also about revisiting this permit to see how it actually has worked in practice with the drinking water division, and if there are some changes that need to be made, perhaps at that point we can address several of these issues, one being the waste issue and some other things.
So I'll just jump in here on 2 points. Well, first of all, again, to thank staff, and I think that the people that commented here today recognize that as well. This has been just a tremendous job working with the stakeholders and really narrowing it down. Really, we have very few comments at this point to refine this. So mostly everything was what I would say almost, technical in nature. The one area that I continue to have concerns about is on use site monitoring, and I am still a little confused. I recognize that there may be ability to aggregate and all that, so just again focusing on farm in particular, and I'm just picturing irrigated lands and all the reports that they're having to file for that, and then we've got an administrator that they're responsible, and if they have to do this monthly monitoring or something of that nature, I just don't see it being workable, unless there becomes a huge cost differential, which I don't, or price differential between recycled water and what a grower could otherwise get. So if it's a huge savings, then maybe they'd be willing to deal with yet another report. But without that, I just see that most users would say this is just another, regulatory layer. And so I really like the language here, recognizing it probably would need to be tweaked anyway because there have been, recent changes. But the language here referencing the frequency of use site inspections shall be based on the complexity and risk of each use site. And I would even say, and other factors such as, other reports that would need to be done, such as irrigated lands. I'm not suggesting that language in particular, but just these other factors.
Yep, so, I would point out that Board Member Diadamo shares the concern with me. So I just want, for the record.
I guess if I may, first of all, I wanted to thank you commenters because, even though we had extensive comments, given the short time, it was really helpful. They did the quality control for us. And the comments that we have received from SWRCB, water reuse, and the direction that the board has given us, I think we have ideas that we can address your concerns and their concerns, so we'll work on those during the break and come back, and hopefully we'll have a solution that maybe both Tam and Steve can agree on the timing.
I thought that was pretty quick of Board Member Dodek to go for quarterly between yearly and whatever. I was with her there, so think about that. But really figuring out the right management scheme for avoiding duplication and however to do it is important. It may well be, I know we're at, recycled water is not a new thing. I mean, Israel recycles 80% of their water for this, and there's a lot to be learned from around the world on this. In some ways, we're behind on it, but I'd be interested in what their safeguards are. Not today, but sometime soon to look at it. I really do like the notion of having you report back in the relatively short time, like within a year, not waiting for a 2-year, just to see how it's going, to allay some of the concerns that some people may have, and to build a record of what it is we might need to change and tweak, coordination, monitoring, etc. I am not inclined, as much as I respect where all the concerns are coming from, and again, I have a track record of supporting recycled water that goes back 20 years, and I have been slow at it even 20 years ago, because I think you can kill it if you go too fast. You want to move it, but you don't want to move it so fast that you lose public support or you make mistakes. So I think monitoring is helpful, sometimes just for the data and sometimes for putting people on notice that we will be watching and that they have to be responsible about it. Because given the lack of runoff that we're expecting and directing here, people have got to know that's what this permit is for. This is not for opening the doors to profligate use of recycled water any more than you would want profligate use of fresh water. So if we have a few more bells and whistles than we may need, I think that's a healthy way to proceed, but not so many bells and whistles that it's not even going to be useful. So we're at that interesting phase. The one thing I would like you to think about that my colleagues haven't talked about, and we didn't talk about a lot in the discussion, is this notion of public notification. I'm not sure I feel the need to go to there needs to be a petition process when someone enrolls in a general permit. I don't know what we normally do in that situation, but some sort of public notification that it happened would be helpful. If someone's going to change a WDR, that's going to require it anyway. And I just want you to think about that, either how to do that, if there's a way, or options, or why not, to be able to respond to that concern, so that people in a community kind of know what's going on and what to expect, and just so they can actually also be out there being citizen monitors of this, of these issues. In general, because again, we all want to move forward towards responsible use of all water, including recycled water.
So just make sure that I'm clear on what you're wanting us to think about a public notification prior to enrollment of.
Yeah, what do we, how does it work? And again, I'm sorry, the
We
general
don't-
permit stuff.
In general, we don't have notifications of enrollment. The permit itself goes through a public process.
Right.
And then the enrollment is considered ministerial. That means that if they follow this permit, then there are no other public process required.
Right. And I'm not suggesting it has to be a big hearing or anything, but how do people find out about enrollment in permits? It's a public record somewhere, right? It's not a secret role when you enroll
Right,
in a
it's
permit.
in our database systems. That's how people would find out. There are some exceptions. We have required certain notifications and certain general permits for certain activities. But along with that, then we have to think about, well, okay, we have a public notification. Does that mean that we wait a month or 2 months before someone is allowed to actually implement? Because if you're going to have a public notification, I think that you need to have some recognition that people might comment and that you have to review that comment and make a decision about it, as opposed to putting it out for public notice. Or we could do
Let me offer a.
This is what I'm asking you to
let
think
me-
about. I'm not asking you to do, I'm sorry, let me.
I think I might
He's
have a
trying to figure
solution
out
for
mine.
this.
I do
Well,
too.
Can I clarify what it is I'm asking first, though, before you
Sure,
guys
we
try to
discussed
solve
this
it?
last week when John was not in the office, so he didn't have the benefit of that
You mean
discussion.
somebody else had this response to the comments we had read? 'Cause
It
these
was
came up.
suggested, we met and spoke with the coast keepers twice, once with you and
Right.
once with staff about a week and a half ago. And Tim, at that point, brought up that to the extent that users are currently under individual WDRs or an individual order, when the regional boards retract that order because they've enrolled under this order, that retraction will go to the regional boards, and that would be a public process.
Right.
And we could.
Rescission. It's rescission, actually.
Yeah, the rescission.
Yeah.
We could post any new enrollments on the web page, so just provide a list. Water Rights does that all the time when they get changes. I don't see that that's a huge workload. I don't know, John, do you think it's a huge workload? I don't think there's that
Before
many people.
John answered that, let me build upon what you just said, Vicki, and now I turn to Karen because I always turn to her when I talk about my pet project, which is performance measures. So assuming that the board is going to be adopting this order today, my next question to you would be, well, and we've already touched upon it, how are we going to track the success of this order, not just in the number of enrollees, but the actual volume of recycled water that is being put to use, and of course the outcome and all that. And so I would like you, maybe not today, but at some point to have a follow-up discussion on what that report card might look like. And as part of that report card, I think we should identify who all the enrollees are and where the water is being used and how much and all that as just part of our performance tracking mechanism, but also make that available on our web page so that people know where the water is being used and that they can also be engaged in this activity.
I think
So
that
not
would actually
necessarily,
help
not necessarily to, to have a public process and comment on the notices, but to be more transparent in terms of the implementation of this order.
No,
I think that might help with the report that the Division of Financial Assistance does periodically, trying to collect information on how much water has been recycled. I know that they've had problems in the past trying to get that information. So we'll see what we can work out. The other thing that I wanted to point out in terms of the monitoring frequency, in response to the comment that you made, Steve, I want to make sure that the board members understand that Title 22 does allow for use of secondary undisinfected water in certain circumstances. Also, in addition to higher levels of treatment, the uses depend on the level of treatment that the water receives. So I don't want that to be lost in the discussion, So we'll try to address that as well.
All right, think about that over lunch, and then to follow up on what my intent was, although that was fine, I thought. I was also interested in just the public who may be concerned having knowledge that a permit's going out or that someone's enrolled. Again, transparency, but I don't want it to wait for our performance report to go up on a website. So that's what I had in mind. All these are valid things, but
Yeah, I
finish
think what we were
my thought.
suggesting was that we coordinate with the regional boards. Once those orders are, when NOAs are issued, we post them on our website,
Yeah.
which would help us with the tracking and reporting in a year.
Right, and someone could sign up for an email notification, for example, if they were particularly interested. I mean, I do think if we want to build support for this, it means we have to have compliance, and we have to have folks engaged, particularly folks who are concerned about it, in watching what's happening. So I do think that is building a community of confidence in this very important arena. So with that, if people don't have other suggestions for now, I suggest we all get some sustenance. You may want to go beyond hummus and crackers, and what was the first? Weird crackers, and something else. And so I'm going to give a full hour because I want them to be able to get food and think. I want us to get food and think, which for those of you who don't know, usually I don't take that long.
Could
So,
I
yeah.
suggest that we give a little bit more time because there's a number of comments that
So
need to-
you
I would suggest
suggest a
that we
time.
back at 2 o'clock.
Two's fine, sure. Sure. See you all then.
I just changed my flight. I saw it coming. Yeah, I doubt that